the American League Championship. I don't believe it. It just continues. My, oh my.
High fly ball into right field. She is gone.
Oh, drives one. Right field. Did he do it? He did. Are you kidding me? Let's go.
I, for one, am tired of waiting. I'm tired of waiting for the postseason to end just so I can get to the hot stove. And then the hot stove sits cold for like a week and a half. I'm tired of this. I want to see some action. The Phillies, trade Bryce Harper. Angels trade Mike Trout. Ohtani, make a freaking decision already. It's November 10, 11, the second weekend in November, and I am done sitting around twiddling my thumbs waiting for some baseball news to occur. And I'm not going to apologize for that. This is the FSS Plus podcast. Jason Churchill, Casey Bellon. Nothing's happening, man. Like, nothing's happening, Mr. Bellon. Like, and we talked before we hit record on the show, like, there's not tons to talk about, but this is our job. This is what we do. We figured out the things that are interesting to us is what we're going to get to, and we hope that it's interesting to all of you. But I want something to happen. We've seen a couple of minor trades and claims, and really right now it's about like QO decisions. November 14, November 17 is the deadline for teams to tender contracts to club-controlled players, including arbitration eligibles. And we're actually going to talk about that on the show today. Arbitration decisions that will impact the free agent market. And there are some interesting ones where you got to think there's a trade or non-tender situation coming. So we'll go through that. You also want to talk about teams that can kind of go from zero to hero in 2024. Teams that weren't contenders really at all in 2023 that have a legitimate chance to contend in 2024. And we'll talk about how that looks. Now, Casey Bellon wrote division by division, which really plays into this conversation, Casey, about how teams that didn't get to the playoffs in 2023, how they get there. And in some cases, how those teams get back. The teams we've chosen. So what Casey and I decided to do was, Casey, you choose an NL team, and Church, you choose an AL team, and Casey chose the Cardinals, which are a really interesting club, can go in a lot of directions, and I chose Boston. I almost chose Detroit, but I chose Boston. I think it's a better conversation. So we'll go over that as well. And if anything breaks during the recording of this show, we will delete the entire show that we just recorded and record a brand new one. No, I'm kidding. We're not going to do that.
Yeah, I think we're going to get done here as soon as we're done. And I hit publish on this. Something's happening. Cody Bellinger's going to sign or something.
Yep, 9-team trade, 9-team 74-player trade. A cross-sport deal. Like the Phillies traded Kyle Schwarber to the Los Angeles Chargers for, Keenan Allen or whatever. Yeah, we're going to see something really strange. Or Rob Manfred will say something stupid. Well, that would probably, yeah. It's not exactly the same as a cross-sport trade. I wish that was a thing, though, to be honest with you. A cross-sport trade. I mean, that would be amazing. So there's always baseball to talk about. There's always decisions to be made, basically year-round. Sometimes we go a little slow in November. Sometimes it gets a little slow in January, February as we wait for spring training to open. And then sometimes it gets boring, relatively speaking, during spring training. I'm not a big spring training game fan, Casey. When spring training comes, I'm kind of like, all right, can we just be done with this right now? Like I'm losing, I've never had patience for that. In my older age, I'm starting to lose patience in general. And I was actually just having a conversation with a friend of mine yesterday, Robin. And I was like, look, if you're bragging about having patience, traffic came up, right? That was the conversation. Like, nobody likes to be in traffic, right? And she was like, yeah, I've just basically developed the patience for it. And I was like, well, here's what Jason Churchill does. He tries to find a way to avoid the need for patience. If there's a patience required element to this, I'm probably going to find a way out of it. So I don't know. I got to find a way to hibernate, I guess, when baseball gets slow. I guess that's, what I'm getting to here.
See, but then I asked you the other day, we talked about if you're going to spring training or not, and you said you are, I believe.
Yes, but here's the thing. I will not watch one single big league game.
So you're not
I'm
going
shaking
down
my head
there
right now.
to
No, I
watch.
will spend the entire time in the backfield watching the minor leaguers. I will not go to one single big league game. Not one single thing. It will be baseball all day, from basically 9 a.m. to like basically 1 or 2 in the afternoon when the minor leaguers walk off the field for the day, and then I'll go goof off or whatever. But I'm not going to one. The plan is to not go to one big league game. Not that I'm specifically trying to avoid it, but it's not what interests me. So if it's backfields all day in Surprise or Peoria or whatever it is, and there's a night game somewhere that's interesting, fine. Then I'll go to a big league game. But backfields first, and that's not why I go to spring training. That's why I also don't go really early. Minor league camp is not full for like 2 or 3 weeks after major league camp opens. You get that February 15th date or 12th or 17th or whatever it is, and then 2 or 3 weeks later, the minor leaguers are supposed to report. It's a completely different schedule. You won't find Churchill in Peoria February 26th or anything. I'm not spending my birthday down there. Get out of here.
Churchill's patience only extends to non-big league guys, prospects. That's it.
I mean, it's not even really patience. Like, that's not really a patience
Interest.
thing. I'm literally just, it's an interesting. You're right. It is. I'm not interested in watching, I don't know, Freddie Freeman get 2 at-bats against fringe major leaguers and then walk down the right field line and go home. I don't care. I'm also big, by the way, and you've heard me say this before. I know you have. Fans think teams base roster decisions on spring training performances, and they don't. But teams let fans think that by saying things like, if he has a good spring, but it actually doesn't really, it's not really about like, did he hit 300 in camp, or did he strike out a bunch of guys in his opportunities? It's really the whole ball of wax. It's like, what was his pedigree coming in? What's the trend? Where's he at in his development? Does he project? And did he throw strikes? And did he execute in spring? It's the whole package. Spring training is such a tiny sample. Hitters get 30 or 40 at bats. Starters pitch 20 innings maximum. You know what I mean? Like, that's not going to convince a club, well, this is the dude, right? Like, it's the whole thing. So I don't need to see that. I don't need to see that at all. People complain because not enough spring training games are on television. Are you one of those people, by the way, that you wish more spring training games were on television?
No.
Yeah.
I almost could care less about spring training, really.
Yeah. And I could too, but I do enjoy the backfield stuff. I like to see the player development staff work with the kids, see how they react. I do have fun doing that. It's just something I enjoy. The big league guys are whatever. I'm done with them. I'm done with them.
The only reason I like spring training is because it means we're closer to regular season baseball.
Absolutely. It does. You're right. That's a good point. It does signify, hey, real meaningful so to speak, is coming. Anyway, so here we are in the winter. We're early in the hot stove process. I'd say the hot stove is lukewarm at best because it's basically just buzz and talk. But there are going to be some arbitration decisions that come up in the next, it can happen at any point, but the deadline for that is November 17. And every club has a handful at least of arbitration decisions that are at least somewhat interesting. So I thought Casey and I would just kind of roll down this list a little bit and look at some of the, and it's mostly advanced numbers. And we'll just go down alphabetically, by team nickname and talk about the guys who might be non-tender candidates or trade candidates based on the arbitration projection. And we're using MLB Trade Rumors arbitration projections. You could find that at MLBTradeRumors.com. It's one of their top stories. They do a really good job of projecting these. They're not exactly right, but they're usually really, really close. And it's certainly good enough to use in these types of circumstances. So right at the top of this list, Casey, is the Angels. And nothing really stands out to me there. Luis Rengifo has a 4.2 million projection. Taylor Ward at 4.5, Patrick Sandoval at 5. Everybody else is under 3. To me, nothing really stands out there. I don't imagine anything stands out for you there either. So if we move on to the Astros, there's a couple of really interesting ones. The first one is Framber Valdez, and the other one is Kyle Tucker. Both are projected to get over $12 million in arbitration. Now, I'm not suggesting the Astros, the defending division champs, or the 2 years ago they won the World Series, 6 years ago they won the World Series. Like that's not a team, and they do spend a little. They're not going to non-tender either of those core players. But might this, and I'm not even necessarily suggesting trade either, although I could see that as well with one of those guys. But could there be some sort of extension talks here? They've extended guys. That's kind of, how they do things. Tucker is going to be more of a big ticket guy. He's got 2 years of control left. He's going to be really, really expensive in the first year of that at $12.6 million. Now the Astros can house that. And the $12 million for Valdez, the Astros can house that. It's fine. But obviously they'd like to get those guys to some level extended and maybe lessen the hit over the next 2 years of those salaries. Really curious to see if something gets done with the new GM there in Houston, but it doesn't look like anyone else on that Houston roster is really worth that conversation at this point. Jose Urquidy, 3.5, Dubon, $3 million, Abreu, $2 million, Chas McCormick, a little over $3 million. There's nothing else really interesting there. I can't imagine the Astros really putting Tucker or Valdez out on the trade market at this point. They're really part of their core. Kyle Tucker's really come on the last 3 years. The Athletics, really not a whole lot going on there. I could see him trading Paul Blackburn, Casey. We've talked about Paul Blackburn as a kind of a good back-end starter that can cover some innings. And because it's the Athletics and because of their situation, $3 million, sure, they can house it, but I could see him getting moved as well. The Blue Jays, though, when you look at that list, Casey, on the Blue Jays, what's the very first thing that stands out when you look at that list? The Toronto Blue Jays arbitration eligibles and the projected numbers on that club.
Yeah, gosh, it's got to be Vladimir Guerrero Jr. at $20 million, doesn't it?
Right. And it's not because you think, no way did they pay him $20 million. It's because it's kind of a big number. It's essentially the QO number for free agents. And he wasn't really that good last year. He really wasn't. I don't have his numbers in front of me, and I'll pull them up. But I have to think, like, at very least, and I know Toronto wants to add to their club and not subtract to their club. This is just a very interesting situation. Do the Blue Jays do they just pay it and just, like, I don't imagine they're just sitting around just thinking one track. We're just going to tender him, pay him whatever that number ends up being, and we'll worry about everything else later.
It's $20 million, and he was worth 1 win last year. So if you're going to pay $20 million a win, that's not good business.
So obviously
they're going to help
pedigree like that. You're thinking there's more there, right? Obviously.
Yeah,
and he has been a lot better.
Back.
I mean,
right?
He has. But $20 million, man. Like, and if you're thinking, what about an extension? Well, what is that worth? Like, what is he? Like, you look back at the 2021 season was his first full season at the big league level where he spent the entire season in the majors. So he broke in just a couple of weeks into the season or whatever in 2019, I think. But and he had a good year that year too. Not a great year, but a decent year. And then the shortened season, he was pretty good, but really exploded in 2021 at age 22, where he put up a 166 WRC plus and hit 48 home runs, hit 311, 401, 601. I mean, he looked like one of the elite bats in baseball, and he was 33% worse the following season, yet still good. And then he was 15% worse than that this season, though still, a quality enough bat to keep in the lineup, but as a first baseman only. And a guy that's not actually good at first base, too, by the way, Gold Gloves aside. He's terrible over there. Yeah, that's a tough one for me. And we're talking about a guy who enters the 2024 season 2 years from free agency.
Let me ask you this. Let me ask you this, Churchill. Do you think
I don't want to go year to year with Guerrero is what I'm saying.
Do you think that Vladimir Guerrero Jr. wants an extension right now?
Yes, but under certain conditions. Under use the entire body of work, not what have you done for me lately.
Yeah, I would think that he would want at least one more year to see if he can return to a 6-win player.
If I'm his agent, I would be saying, here's the thing. Let's figure out a number that we would take today. And like the lowest number that we would take today, because here's the thing. He's gotten so much worse, so significantly worse the last 2 years. He was, I mean, you look at that we'll just do it from a wins above replacement standpoint, because I think more people are familiar with that than WRC plus. But from a wins above replacement standpoint, he was a 6-win player in 2021. He was a 3-win player in 2022, just under 3. And he was a 1-win player last year. That's not a good trend. And while he's going to have all the confidence in the world, and his agent wants him to have all the confidence in the world, don't you have to kind of create a parachute here for yourself? Like if the Toronto Blue Jays want to say, hey, we want to buy out your 2 final years of arbitration, which are probably worth $50 million, by the way, and we want to buy out 2 years of free agency at $60 million. So we want to give you 4 and 110. You might say, I guess maybe I would take that. Or you have to buy out at least 3 years of free agency. So I would take 5 and 140, but I won't take 4 and 110. You have to find the line, whatever that is. And if you're Guerrero, you're only 24 years old. He's gonna be 25 in March. Still growing, unfortunately, in all ways. He's still growing, but he obviously could get back close to that. So it's a good question, Casey. Like, if you're Vlad Guerrero, do you want to do it now, coming off the season you just came off? There's absolutely an argument you don't, but you're kind of running out of time too. The Blue Jays might not want nothing to do with buying 4 free agent years. You know what I mean? And if that's the case, it's like you have to do it now, or you're getting a 4-year deal at most, and you don't have any control until after the 2025 season. So lots to consider there for all sides. That's a really interesting one. And I just wonder if that number pushes the team to, I don't know, at least think about, does it make sense trading Vladimir Guerrero? Or think about some kind of an extension that loosens the screws a little bit on payroll. I mean, the Blue Jays spend a little bit, but they're not a team like, not the Padres or the Mets or the Red Sox or the Yankees, right? That's an interesting one. The Danny Jansen one, Casey, stands out to me too, because they have a catcher in Alejandro Kirk, who's also eligible for arbitration. But it's his first year, and he's projected to get about $2.5 million. Where Jansen, who's more the backup, at $5+ million. Like, that seems to me like a prime trade candidate if I'm the Toronto Blue Jays, because he didn't have a great year in 2023, but he's a pretty darn good number 2 catcher, and he's actually served as a DH a little bit because he can hit. That one's an interesting one. Here's my general question for you, Casey, at this point. So there's a couple of relievers we're going to talk about in this conversation that where their arbitration number starts to get bigger. There's 4 or 5 that I can think of off the top of my head, but there's 3 of them in particular where I don't know if the pitcher matches the value of his projected arbitration number to that particular team. Jordan Romano at $7.7 million. If I'm the Blue Jays, I know I'm not a small market team. I know they're spending more than $100 million on payroll. Jordan Romano's gone backwards over the last year. And it seems like his struggles late in 2022 just bled over into 2023. And it's not like he was bad. He just wasn't nearly as good. You see things like the walk rate climb more than a percentage and a half, faltering in certain situations. I don't know if I love the trend there for a 30-year-old reliever who's been good 3 years in a row, was really, really good most of 2022, like exceptionally good. And 2023 was just good, not great. Do I want to pay him almost $8 million? Like, is that something you'd be comfortable with if your payroll was, I don't know, $180 million in CBT money?
I think I would rather pay somebody else $8 million.
So you're thinking you'd rather than Romano, you'd rather give like Robert Stevens $8 million.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you can get value right now out of Jordan Romano. Maybe after next year, there is no value to be had for
That's true.
Jordan Romano.
Yeah.
So, it may be something that they put on the market.
Yeah. So I see what you're getting at here. So the combination of what you might be able to get in trade for Romano and essentially just using the money you saved, making that deal to replace him with a guy that might actually be better is obviously better for the Toronto Blue Jays. I totally get what you're saying. That's a good point. Because he's still good. I don't want to suggest that he's not good. But that walk rate, like that seems to be the outlier. In his 3 full seasons, his walk rates are 9.9%, 8.1%, and 9.7%. So that 8.1% that helped make him so good in 2022 seems to be the outlier, of his control and command performances. So he's an interesting one. It's a lot. Can they house it? Yes, they can. They can take it, but they might be able to spend that money better. I'm really big on that. I noticed. I'm really big. You've probably heard me say that a lot. Can I spend this money better? And I think in a lot of cases, yes, it doesn't mean you always get rid of the player, but it has to be part of the equation for me. Can I spend the $20 million it would cost to keep Vladimir Guerrero at that particular? Can I spend that better? And if I can, do I want to do something with Vlad Guerrero Jr. that's different? Same with Jordan Romano. Do I want to spend that nearly $8 million on Romano, or do I want to sign him to an extension and lower that number for 2024? Or do I want to just trade him and get him off the books and start over with somebody else? That's a consideration for me. The other one there in Toronto that's somewhat interesting is Dalton Varsho at $5.5 million. And mostly that's because he was just bad in his first year in Toronto. That deal early for Arizona looks pretty good. I do think Varsho has a chance to bounce back. He's a little bit of a unique player. The Braves, not a whole lot going on there. They're not going to non-tender AJ Minter at $6.5 million or even Max Fried at $14.4. Nicky Lopez at almost $4 million. Don't really love that, but the Braves will spend money. Nobody else on that roster is due a significant enough raise. Although $3 million for Mike Soroka might be too much since his availability is the main issue there. The Brewers might be the most interesting team on this list, Casey, and not because they're going to non-tender Brandon Woodruff. Although, let me take that back. They're not going to non-tender Corbin Burns or Willy Adames. Corbin Burns has a $15 million projection. Willy Adames has a $12.5 million projection. Trading those guys is absolutely on the table. 1 season left. Brandon Woodruff, however, I'm not sure why you wouldn't non-tender him. It's his final year of arbitration before he hits free agency, and he might miss the entire season. So I'd be surprised if they didn't non-tender. Or, I don't know, maybe there's a team out there that thinks he's going to be back in late July and think it's worth $11.5 million. I can't really see it. So that's an interesting one. Rowdy Tellez is not getting that money. They've already taken care of Eric Lauer out of that situation and got him off the roster. Here's a fun conversation. We were just talking about Jordan Romano in Toronto, Casey. Devin Williams is worth every penny of the $6.5 million that's projected to him. But if you're the Brewers and you don't really think you're going to contend, Brandon Woodruff out, you're probably going to trade Willy Adames and or Corbin Burns. What are you doing with Devin Williams this winter? If you're the Brewers, what do you do with Williams, who's got 2 years of control left and is probably going to make $16-ish million over those 2 seasons?
Yeah, he's got to be on the market, right? But the smarter move might be waiting until the deadline, the trade deadline. Some team that really needs, back-end relief pitching is probably going to pay more, at least I would think, at the deadline, even though you're giving up, 3 months of control. But pay more at the deadline because, they're gearing up to compete in September and are like where they're sitting.
Right. So you're not taking a shot that he impacts two pennant races. You're taking a shot that he impacts the second season you have him because he's going to impact the first one. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I'm totally into that too. That's an interesting one. $6.5 million, not a lot of money. I think a lot of teams would be interested in Devin Williams. Be interesting to see what the price cost, the trade price is for a guy like Williams at this point in his career. He's been awfully good, but he's also very, very unique. He reminds me a little bit of a Houston Street, just in the way that when you look at the stuff, we're not talking about a guy who throws 100 miles an hour, right? We're talking about a guy who sits like 93 to 95. I think his average fastball is 94. Throws the occasional, hard slider or cut or whatever you want to call it. Throws a lot of changeups, right? Like the changeup he throws, more than half the time, approaching 60%, almost exactly 58% in 2023. So he's different. He's not the throw 98 in a wicket breaking ball. And I'm also a big believer in teams that have bullpens that can throw from both sides, that throw from different angles, that throw different pitch mixes. And there's a lot of clubs out there that just have that fastball slider type, the sinker slider, the four-seamer, slider. And Devin Williams fits on every single team that wants to contend in 2024. That $6.5 million number, Casey, isn't even too much for the Cincinnati Reds. You know what I mean? Like, it's not even too much for the Colorado Rockies. It's not too much for certainly the Giants or the Dodgers. And I wonder if the Brewers are just going to get bowled over for Devin Williams. The Brewers are a huge key to the entire offseason because of Adames and Burns and Devin Williams in particular. Folks generally ask about Christian Yelich, Casey, but I believe, like, you look at his deal, he's just owed too much money. I just can't see it. He's already, 32 or 33. He did have a pretty good year this past year. It seems to me they'd have to eat too much of that deal to get anything back to make the whole endeavor worth it. I don't know if you have a different feel on that situation.
Yeah, and the whole purpose of trading him would be to save money. It's really not to get. I mean, in some ways, it's to get value back, but really, it's to save money. They want to step back in payroll. So you're trading Yelich to not have to pay that big contract, but you're only going to get anything for him if you eat the contract. So I don't see it. I don't see that happening. And I'm pretty sure that Yelich does he have a full no trade clause? I think he does.
He has hang on. Yes, he has a full no trade. You got to imagine he'd be open to getting out of there. But he's going to have some say in it, right? Like, he's not just going to go anywhere. Right. But he's owed $130 million guaranteed through 2028 at $26 million a year. And then there's a mutual option that comes with a $6.5 million buyout. So he's owed $136.5 million guaranteed through the 2028 season. And we're talking about a guy who, again, he's 32 years old in December, and he just had his first, I'd call it his first good season since 2019. He really struggled. 2020 was weird, forgiven, but he wasn't good in 2021. It seemed like there was no power. 2022, same thing. Seemed like there wasn't a lot of power. And in 2021, by the way, he did miss 45 games. But he's been healthy the last 2 years. And finally, this year, some of the power came back. Not a lot of it. He's not the same player he was when he was winning MVPs, but he was a 4-win guy this year. I'm just not betting that I can get that out of him. I'm not betting on that at all. I don't know if even if I'm a team like the Yankees or the Mets that just is okay absorbing, big dollars, I think I would still want the Brewers to eat like 50 to 70 million of that 136.5 that I'm going to have to spend. At least, maybe more, considering the fact that he's 32 now.
And I think we can circle back around to the idea that I can take that money and spend it better elsewhere.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. I just think they're stuck with him. I think they're going to be stuck with Yelich, unfortunately. And Yelich is a likable player, and hopefully he stays healthy. But I don't think the Brewers are going to be able to move on from that. The Cardinals, they don't really have a whole lot of I don't think they're going to non-tender Tyler O'Neill in the final year of arbitration at $5.5 million. I think they'd be willing to take the risk that he bounces back a little bit, that he's healthier, has a better year, and maybe they can move him at the deadline for something. But that's an interesting one to think about. Tommy Edman at 6.5, he's worth it. There's nobody else there that's really in danger of, I think, getting non-tendered. Although Dylan Carlson and O'Neill both are trade candidates, certainly, because they have the logjam in the outfield. The Cubs, absolutely no one that really stands out arbitration wise, whether it be some sort of trade or contract or non-tender sort of scenario. Although contract extensions for good players, young players like Justin Steele, are always a possibility. The Diamondbacks are interesting because here we get another one of those relievers. Like Zach Gallen, $10.9 million projection, no-brainer. That guy's worth every single penny. Christian Walker at 12.7. Maybe they want to do something there because it's his final season. Then he hits free agency, and he's a little bit older than most free. I think he's 32 years old already. But Paul Sewald at $7.3 million. Now, we're familiar with Sewald because we live in the Northwest, and that's the team that's closest to us geographically, where the people around us are fans of it, the people we talk to on a regular basis. Paul Sewald is one of the most beloved Seattle Mariners of the last 20 years, which is remarkable because he wasn't even there that long. He wasn't even in Seattle that long. Then he gets traded to Arizona, and every Mariners fan is like, go Paul Sewald, right? I mean, it was just a cool thing. I love that. I love that we weren't like, screw Paul Sewald. He's not a Mariner anymore. I love that we can just root for players. But $7.3 million is the projection on Paul Sewald. Now, we're talking about a team in Arizona who their 2023 40-man tax number was about $144 million. Now, I'm not saying they can't house it. I'm saying, again, might they think $7.3 million is a little pricey for us? We think by trading Paul Sewald, we can get something in return and then use the $7 million on something a little bit more valuable to us. There's a chance they think that way, and Sewald's days in Arizona could potentially be numbered. I also wonder if the Diamondbacks aren't in a situation to actually start spending, though. Like, I've heard Matt Chapman's name attached to Arizona. I think it was unfounded. I don't think it's an actual rumor. I just think somebody wondered out loud, and it made me start to wonder. Maybe spend a little. If you can get a guy like Chapman for $4 and $100 and not take the long-term risk, maybe that makes sense for a team like Arizona. So maybe they do start spending a little bit more, and the Paul Sewald $7 million doesn't become an issue. The Dodgers, I think it's interesting that Walker Buehler's due $8 million, and he's probably going to be on an innings limit in 2024. There's 1 year left on Walker Buehler. I don't really see any, like Will Smith at $9 million, very good catcher, one of the better catchers in the National League. I don't see that being an issue for the big-time Dodgers. The Giants, J.D. Davis at almost $7 million. Does that alarm you at all, Casey? I mean, he had a pretty decent year. He's a decent player. He's a quality player. He's a free agent at the end of the season, but $6.8 million projection on him. Any kind of red flag there if you're the Giants?
I mean, I think you hold on to J.D. Davis, and he may have some value on the trade market if you want to.
It's true, and they have a lot of guys like that too. They have a lot of first base, third base type guys. Wilmer Flores, who had a good year, is one of them. And you just wonder if there's not something else they can do with Davis or that money. But do you feel differently about Mike Yastrzemski at $7.3 million? Because I do.
I'm non-tendering Mike.
I'm trying to trade that guy right now if I can.
Yeah.
And if I can't, then I'm non-tendering him. Yep, absolutely.
And I doubt that they get anything. Well, maybe they could. You
might be able to get a little something. Yeah,
he hit 15 home runs last year. I mean,
$7 million is kind of a lot for a guy that probably isn't an everyday player.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it for the Giants. Austin Slater at 3.6. That's a no-brainer. Lamont Wade Jr. at 3.3. Tyler Rogers 3.2. Tyro Estrada at 4.8. Those are fine. Those guys are producing enough. The Guardians is that situation is a little interesting too. Not because Shane Bieber's $12.2 million means they're going to not tender him, but he's had some injury issues. Hasn't been exactly the same pitcher he was 2, 3, 4 years ago. And final year of his deal, final year of his team control. I imagine the Guardians try to trade Shane Bieber this winter, and if they can't, then they do something over the summer if they can. But that $12 million, I mean, what are the Guardians spending these days? Not a lot, right? $12 million seems like it's most of their payroll this side of Jose Ramirez, but they basically spend like the Diamondbacks do. So if $7 million is something to consider for the Diamondbacks for a reliever, $12 million is probably something for the Guardians to think about. I would think they probably try to do something with Bieber other than just tendering him and housing him. Ramon Liriano at 4.7. I think that's a non-tender situation for me. Cal Quantrill is an interesting one for Cleveland. Like he's got the pedigree. His dad was Paul Quantrill. He's got a good arm. He's 28 years old. He's never really put it together at the big league level. He's not a guy that misses bats. Did not have a good 2023. I just don't know that you can pay that guy who doesn't really look like a 28 start rotation option. I don't know that you can pay that guy $6.6 million. Casey, I think that's a non-tender or a trade scenario for me too.
Yeah, I
Everything
mean, you
else is
look at
pretty
what
much
he
a
did
no-brainer.
last year, Quantrill. What did he do? Okay, he had a FIP over 4.5. He had an
19 starts
XFIP.
and under 100 innings too. Yeah.
Yeah, and he had an XFIP over 5.43 for his XFIP, and an ERA over 5. So yeah,
None
you're
of the
gonna
runs
pay
allowed metrics liked him at all. No.
none, 0, and he was striking out. Nobody. He was striking out 5 guys every 9 innings. So
Yeah. Despite the fact that he throws 94, it just goes to show you,
yeah,
velocity is not everything. Your pitch has to move. There has to be deception. You have to have secondary stuff.
yeah.
It's and he's never really lived up to it. There's not really a year where you can go, well, if we can get him back to this, then he's worth that 6.5. There's partial seasons. In 2021, he was okay. He was worth almost 2 wins. In 2022, he was worth almost 2 wins, but still not missing bats. And in 2021, 18 of his appearances were out of the bullpen. So I can't imagine they're going to spend that money. I think he's getting non-tendered. The rest of the Guardians arbitration eligible seem like easy decisions.
Can we just note how impressive it is, how fruitful the starting pitching market should be this offseason? If you keep adding guys like that aren't already on the free agent market, that you're not thinking about, like guys like Shane Bieber or Cal Quantrill, and Bieber's likely going to be on the trade market, but you just keep going down. If you're looking for starting pitching this year, it's a good year to be looking for starting pitching.
And you get the 2 Japanese guys added to that, Yamamoto at the top with Aaron Nola and Blake Snell and Sonny Gray and Jordan Montgomery and Eduardo Rodriguez, and then you get Shota Imanaga, who's kind of a mid-rotation type, with Marcus Stroman and Michael Wacha, and maybe Jack Flaherty is a chance you want to take. Lucas Giolito, certainly a guy I would think about on a 3-year deal. And then there's the 1 and 2 year types like Seth Lugo and Sean Manaea that you could take a shot at. You're right. It is a good, and we might get more of those guys added to it, which is the whole reason, Casey, why we made a great decision talking about arbitration eligibles that might get added to the free agent market. So I appreciate the pat on the back, which is essentially what you're doing to both of us. Yeah, this is why you're here. Okay. So on your end of your contract with Future Stars, it doesn't say that, but on my end of your contract, I can see the part where it says in parentheses and pat us on the back. And you're doing it without even knowing that it was.
Yeah. Hey, I did come up with the idea to talk about
you did.
Projected arbitration salaries.
You came up with the whole every idea. Every idea is I take them and make them mine and pretend that I came up with them. Every idea we talk about on the show is Casey. In fact, this whole show is scripted. Casey writes it down, types it out, sends it to us, and usually Joe Doyle is with us, but he's on a little mini vacay over the weekend.
I think he's just driving around. He said he's going to
just driving around in circles. We did ask him why he was going where he said he was going. I got no answer.
Yeah, no answer. I'm pretty sure that he just is driving around to avoid the episode. But what do I know?
Maybe, yeah. I get the feeling Joe doesn't like me too much. You get that feeling too?
He doesn't like you? Yeah. Well, I don't know. You're always yelling at people. So.
And it sucks because I like Joe. Right? Like you like Joe, right?
I love Joe.
I think Joe's a good dude. He knows his stuff. That's why he's here. He was my first idea when I came aboard. I was like, let's get this guy too, and maybe that was a mistake. Maybe he's driving down to Houston to try to take my job, like Dwight Schrute style.
That's what it is. That's
why he didn't want to tell us where he was going.
That's what it is. He's not going camping or whatever. He's driving down to put an application in for your job.
Yeah, application? Is that a new state near Michigan?
Application State.
Application State. There you go. That's good. All right, so that's the Guardians. The Marlins. There's one interesting guy on. Well, there's 2 actually. Tanner Scott had a really good year out of the bullpen. Final year, his deal. He's due almost $6 million. I can't imagine the Marlins house that. I think they try to trade him. I think they're going to be able to trade that. Teams are always looking for power arms out of the bullpen. They had a good year last year. The interesting one here, Casey, to me, is Luis Arraez. You look at what's going on with the Marlins right now. Kim Ng quits because they try to go above her head, which was such a trash move by the Marlins, by the way. So I understand her making that move and getting out of there. She earned that spot. You want to take it away from her? Like, come on, man. Like, what are you doing?
But then she wasn't interested in Boston either, so that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, and I wonder if that was just because she knew she didn't have a shot, that they were doing it for the wrong reasons, or if she simply just doesn't want the Northeast, doesn't want the big media market, or doesn't want the Northeast or something like that. Like that all could be, I don't know. I give her the benefit of the doubt. She turned it down and wasn't for her, which is interesting. But Luis Ariz, the projection, he's got 2 years left. The projection is $10.8 million for 2024. The Marlins are in a pretty interesting situation, an unfortunate situation. They traded Pablo Lopez to get Ariz. They've had some injury issues, severe injury issues in their rotation. I mean, when I say significant, I mean they have prospects that are getting hurt. Alcantara is now hurt. I cannot imagine. I would be absolutely floored if we don't at least hear several rumors about Luis Ariz on the trade market. It makes too much sense to try to sell high on him, even if you're not going to max out, based on his last season. I mean, this is 2 years of a guy who, while he probably belongs at third base or first base and hits for power like a second baseman, this is a guy that obviously flirted with 400 for a little while, ended up hitting 350. The last 2 seasons, he's had 131 and 132 WRC pluses. And we're talking about a guy who's still only 27 years old in April. Left-handed bat, does a lot of things. Doesn't run, but just tons of contact, 5.5% strikeout rate, 5.7% walk rate, gets on base, all that stuff, and can actually, he's not going to kill you at second base in short stints. You can move him around first base, second base, third base, DH. Maybe ultimately he could play some left field for you. I think teams are going to be interested in him, and I think it would behoove the Miami Marlins to trade him if they like anything. 2 years of Ariz is worth something. Probably not Pablo Lopez, but probably something relatively close, considering there's one less year of Luis Ariz on the books at those prices. But I can't see, Casey, I can't see that Marlins club paying him $11 million, considering all the other issues they have with that team. They have no shot to contend, in my mind. None.
I got to give you credit because I think earlier in April or May, we were talking about Luis Ariz hitting 400 potentially. And not in detriment to what Ariz was doing, but you said, there's no way. No way. Too hard. Can't do it.
Yeah, and I don't want to pat myself on the back for that. It's like saying, Michael Jordan. There's no way Michael Jordan's coming back at 60-some years old. There's no way. I mean, that's how I feel like that is. Like hitting 400 is so incredibly hard. And I think I might have mentioned somewhere along the way too, like I'd be surprised if he barely hits 350, and he hit 354. So, it's just so hard. It's so, so difficult to do, particularly if you don't walk a ton. And he doesn't. 5.5% walk rate, 5.7% to be exact. Doesn't walk a ton. He just puts the ball in play a lot. Those guys have the worst chance to hit 400. The guys that always have the best chance are the Barry Bonds, the Ted Williams, guys like that have had high averages, but also walk a lot. Because if you're going to put the ball in play, like 94% of the time that you go up to the plate, you're gonna put the ball in play. It puts too much pressure on being perfect, right? And you look at a guy like George Brett, flirted with 400 back in 1980 when he hit 390. What an incredible season by George Brett. I know I'm going back 40 plus years, but I think if you're a baseball fan, you know exactly who George Brett is. Now you think Luis Ariz just had a great season, and he did. At 354, 393 with a 132 WRC plus and a 5.5% strikeout rate and a 5.7. Listen to what George Brett did in 1980, just for comparison. Not only did he hit 24 home runs, but he hit 390 with a 454 on base and a 664 slugging. He walked 11.3% of the time and struck out 4.3% of the time. George freaking Brett, baby. That's a 198 WRC plus, by the way, and a 9-win season.
That's a 664 slugging.
Right, yeah. He did miss some time, so I do want to add that, but he did have 515 plate appearances. So it was still pretty close to a legitimate full season. He did get enough trips to the plate, official trips to the plate to qualify for the batting title. But unbelievable. And we're talking about a guy, this was back in the day, and he retired in 1993, but this is back in the day when striking out 25% of the time was unheard of. If you struck out 25% of the time, like you weren't playing or your career was going to be short, right? It just didn't work. I remember in the 80s, just like in the 70s and early 80s, Dave Kingman was kind of that guy. Low average, strike out a lot, hit home runs. And Rob Deere was another one of those guys that struck out 30+% of the time a lot. But those guys were outliers, and now it's the regular thing. So when you see a guy like Arise doing his thing, even though he's not hitting for a ton of power, it's pretty special to watch. But the $11 million in Miami, I don't see it. I don't see it at all. So I think the Marlins have some activity. I'm not saying they're going to non-tender Arise. They're just going to trade him, and I think they're going to trade Tanner Scott. The Mariners. I don't think there are any significant names here. I don't think Logan Gilbert at around $5 million is not going anywhere. Ty France, even at 7.2 after a down season. I could see them trading Ty France, just not because of the $7.2 million specifically. I think he ends up being their first baseman next year. The Mets, I don't see anyone really interesting there either. It's a bunch of small numbers. The Nationals, really no one interesting there. Lane Thomas at $7 million. They're definitely not going to non-tender. But I do wonder if the young team, and Lane Thomas is 30 now, if a young team like Washington doesn't just put him on the trade market while he's got 2 years left and see what they can get for him. And Kyle Finnegan is the one here I do think they move. $5.1 million for essentially a setup guy with 2 years of control left. I think they probably try to move him as well. If not, also Hunter Harvey, whose number is much lower, but same situation, 2 years of control left. The Orioles, Casey, are interesting as well. Anthony Santander, 12.7. Certainly not a non-tender situation, but potentially a trade situation. Before we hit the red button on the show, I asked you about John Means. $5.9 million is the projection. 1 season left. He threw 4 games last year, 23 innings. Didn't really look great. The velo's down a little bit after the surgery. You would think time helps him get back. If you are the Baltimore Orioles, I think you said you would tender him and take that shot, especially since pitching is their need. Wasn't that your take on John Means?
Yeah, I mean, I think if he can return to 2021, 2022, and as a organization, you believe that is more likely than not. There's other aspects that go into this, like, what does their training personnel, think about John Means and
where is he?
What's his attitude and, things like that. But yeah, if they believe that he can come back and be, what he was in 2022 and 2021,
or even anywhere close, really.
Yeah. I mean, I think he
could be a 1.5 win starter, but if he makes 28 starts, he's probably worth $6 million.
Actually, 2022 he only threw 8 innings, so that's not. Right. But 2021, yeah, and really 2019 as well.
So the Orioles also have some kind of a decision to make on Cedric Mullins. Maybe they just give him the 6.4, let him ride out. He's got 2 years left as well. I'm not saying they're going to non-tender him, definitely not. Would they consider trading Cedric Mullins if it helps them get some of the starting pitching that they need? The same thing with Austin Hayes, a little over $6 million is a projection. They have other outfielders, 2 years left for Hayes. Is he a guy they would consider moving? They have outfielders like Colton Cowser and drawing a blank on the other kid they drafted way too high. But Heston Kjerstad is the other guy I'm thinking of. Like, they got guys that can take their spots if they're trying to get pitching. So I imagine one of those guys is, if not both, are somewhat on the block to see what they get. Ryan Mountcastle is the interesting one here. Do you just let him play first base at $4 million? It's pretty decent. He's not great. Or do you see what you can get for him too? You might be able to get a pretty good reliever for Ryan Mountcastle and shave $4 million off and make it a little easier to house Cedric Mullins and Austin Hayes, because we know the Angelos family is not going to spend, Casey. So money is of the utmost importance here when you're trying to build this roster, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think Mountcastle is a prime trade candidate this year.
There's not a lot of first basemen out there, and he can play a little bit of outfield, like maybe wait for that market to dry up in free agency and then toss him out there and see who else out there wants a guy like that. That'd be really that would be interesting. Yeah, there's nobody else real significant on their roster that has a number that looks remotely. Jorge Mateo at $3 million, I might think about moving that, but I don't know that I'm non-tendering that. I still like a lot of the potential in defense and speed he brings to the table. The Padres, the big one is Juan Soto. We don't need to bury that. That's going to come up. We talked ad nauseum about that. Rumors are the Yankees have already engaged with the Padres, so that'll be interesting. Do you pay Scott Barlow $7 million over the Padres? I got to think they're going to try to get rid of that. They're a team trying to get down around $200 million in payroll this year. That's the report anyway. Juan Soto will help them do it. Their free agents will help them do it, Hader and Blake Snell, assuming neither accept the qualifying offer. But I imagine Scott Barlow at $7 million is not the kind of value the Padres are going to want on their roster. And you mentioned before we started Trent Grisham at almost $5 million. Like that's I'm not liking it. Like my stomach's churning because this is a guy who, like, he's had some good years and he's, he just turned 27 years old, but he hasn't hit over 200 since 2021. The strikeout rates are climbing a little bit. He walks quite a bit. It's got, I'd probably say 45 power. But defense is kind of his thing, and he wasn't as sharp doing that this season either. He's a really interesting player. He's a guy that shouldn't be your starter, really. But do you want to pay him, $5 million if you go out and you do some things with Soto, you do some things in free agency, you do some things with maybe some other trades? Can you come up with someone better to be a 1.5 to 2 win center fielder for you that you don't have to pay $5 million to? Those are the kinds of decisions that the Padres are going to have to make if they want to get and keep that payroll, down for a couple of years to avoid. Which brings up their catcher Austin Nola. Hasn't really done a lot. Campusano, if he's healthy, is probably their number one guy. Austin Nola, he's 33 now? Yeah, 30. He's going to be 34 in December. And he hasn't done a lot. He had a $146 with a 38 WRC plus this year. I can't imagine that, at least considering non-tendering him at just under $2.5 million isn't a consideration as well. The Phillies, I see nothing there that's going to scare the Phillies into non-tendering any of those guys. Not Suarez, not Hoffman, not Soto at $5 million. That's a team that wants to spend. Dave Dombrowski is the hired gun. He is the modern-day version of Pat Gillick. That's what he is there to do. I do wonder, not because of the arbitration number, I do wonder if the Phillies don't move Alec Bohm. Like, he's not a good defender at third base. Bryce Harper, as it came out on Thursday, Friday, is going to be the first baseman going forward, which I don't love, but I get. Bohm probably belongs at first base, doesn't really hit like a first baseman. I imagine, like if it were me anyway, I just put this way, I would at least shop Bohm and see what I come up with, because I'd really like Matt Chapman to be my third baseman in Philadelphia. That's who I want in Philadelphia if I'm the Phillies. Get me Matt Chapman here. Get me that defense for the next 4 years, and get me at least an above-average offensive player to go with it. That's the thing with Bohm. Like, he's an okay offensive player. He's not terrible. He makes a lot of contact. But the defense is well below average. He does truly belong at first base. So that's just something I'm curious about. His number is the projected number is $4.3 million. It's his first year of I think it's his first year of arbitration. I don't think he was a Super 2 guy. Right, he wasn't. So this is first go of arbitration. It's a little over $3 million for him. The Pirates, I don't really see anything there. Mitch Keller set to make about $6 million. David Bednar about 4.7. I do wonder, though, just from a competitive standpoint, if moving David Bednar, Casey, might make sense. Throwing another really high quality reliever, onto one of the markets with maybe Paul Sewald, with maybe Tanner Scott, with maybe Jordan Romano, with maybe Devin Williams in Milwaukee. Could be a really interesting early/late market for trades and free agency if some of these guys get non-tendered or some of these guys get traded later in the winter, because these deals don't typically, not all of them anyway, some of these deals don't get settled until a little later in the winter. If the two sides don't agree, we don't know that number until February, until camp opens. They have their little arbitration hearings and they do the dirty deeds on each side, and then they decide, is Bednar going to make 4.1 or is he going to make 4.7? So I don't know. If I'm Pittsburgh, I'm thinking about trading Mitch Keller and David Bednar if I can't extend them. Bednar's got 3 years of control left. Mitch Keller just 2, and he broke out in 2023. So that one's interesting. Casey, the Rangers. You have that Rangers list in front of you? First one that stands out to you is which player? Now, these players are listed on MLBTradeRumors.com, by the way. These players are listed in alphabetical order by last name. So Matt Bush is the first number on the list. But what's the first name, considering the number, that dollar amount after, that stands out most to you for the Texas Rangers?
Yeah, it's got to be Nathaniel Lowe at 8.8 million. It's interesting. I think, and I know we just touched on it before. He wasn't very good, if I recall, in the playoffs, and then towards the end of the year, he was pretty good throughout the season. I'm going to pull his numbers up right now.
He was a 141 WRC plus a year ago, but he was a 114 this season. If my memory serves, he started the season off hot. And then as the team cooled down a little bit, so did he. And he had an absolutely brutal September. So what is Nathaniel Lowe, and how much are you willing to spend to try to get the upside out of him? We're talking about a 28-year-old that's now starting to make some money, some real money at almost $9 million. And I guess for him to be worth $9 million plus moving forward, you have to think he's at least closer to that 140 than he is the 114 that he just put up.
I think my stance here would be, one, the Rangers obviously have a solid amount of payroll that their owner has allowed them to spend. But the other thing is, how many first basemen are available on the market that you're confident, if we just disregard the $9 million number, that you're confident are going to be better than a 2-win player at 114 WRC plus. And I don't know that it's very many.
Sure. Let's think about Nathaniel Lowe the same way you were talking about Jordan Romano a little bit ago. The answer is yes, but this is the way I'd be thinking about it. What can Nathaniel Lowe, could Nathaniel Lowe's trade value plus what else I can get on the free agent market be better for the 2024 and beyond Texas Rangers than just giving Nathaniel Lowe that $8.8 million, for example? I think the answer is generally yes. It's at least possible and maybe even probable. You just have to make sure, okay, there's a free agent out there we like, or a trade target we like. In this case, probably more like a free agent. Like, just for example, what was Lowe? You said he was a 2-win guy. Yeah. Let's say he's a 2.5-win guy, because he was a 2.8 win guy in 22. We'll split the difference. Let's make him a 2.5 win guy. Don't you think Rhys Hoskins is at least a 2-win guy? Just for example, I would say so.
Yeah, I would say at least.
Okay. So
it's kind of a mystery coming off the injury, but
sure. So if Rhys Hoskins is a 2-win guy and Nathaniel is a 2.5-win guy, but you can get Rhys Hoskins for 2-18, essentially the same AAV, but then you also get out of that whole scenario the trade value of Nathaniel Lowe. Theoretically speaking, you're a better team. There's always a way for that player to make more sense as trade bait than to just keep him. There's a way. It doesn't mean, yes, you definitely do this. It means you probably have to think about it. You probably have to see. It's really not about he's not worth the $9 million. It's, again, can I make that $9 million work for me in a different manner? Can this other player at $9 million or so be better, or is the combination of that other player, in our scenario, Hoskins, plus the trade value of Nathaniel Lowe, maybe nets you a reliever or whatever it is, or a backup catcher and a reliever? That's kind of the way I think about a lot of this. I don't think Jonah Heim's 3.6 or the 6.6 for Adolis Garcia scare the Rangers. I don't think any of this scares the Rangers, but I think there might be an opportunity there with Nathaniel Lowe, and this might be the right time to do it. Because I don't think that 141 is coming back. That's definitely the outlier in his career at this particular point. The Rays have a bunch of arbitration eligible guys. The first one that stands out to me, Casey, is the 4.4 to Harold Ramirez. But it's not because I don't think the Rays can handle that number. I think it's because they kind of have a logjam of these first base DH types, guys that they're even squeezing into third base, like Yandy Diaz and Isaac Paredes, especially with Junior Caminero ready to come up, and third base is going to be his position. So now Paredes and Diaz are really first baseman / DH. So is it Harold Ramirez that they're going to maybe see what they can get pitching wise, or is it going to be Yandy Diaz, who, despite the fact that it's early in his career. He's 32 years old, so that'd be really, really interesting. So those guys can really hit. I don't think the Aaron Savali $4.6 million scares them. One of the kind of mock deals I made when I went over my off-season thoughts for my hometown Seattle Mariners recently was a multi-team deal where the Rays traded Tyler Glasnow to the Dodgers. He's scheduled to make, what is it, $25 million, I think, Casey? The Rays can house that, though. They knew this was coming. But there's a way they can send Glasnow out without taking money back and then just re-up with all these guys. And they just go right back at it with basically the same team they had, plus their top prospect, Junior Caminero, coming up. He's remarkable. So I've sparked a little bit of friendship with Austin Shen. He's from the Northwest here. He was in the Mariners organization for a while, but now he's with the Rays. And he started raving about Caminero a year ago. And I was like, who the hell is this pipsqueak you're talking about? And he kept telling me, and I'm going to pull up the conversation. He kept telling me things like, this is like a year ago. He says, bruh, Caminero is the silliest baseball player I've ever played with. And then I said, yeah, a lot of swing and miss, but man, he's 19. He goes, and the swing and miss isn't even that bad. He's got the craziest bat speed and exit velocities I've ever seen in my life. And then I made a joke, he might have a chance. And he goes, flat out, he's going to be the next big thing. So then he makes the Future Stars game. Now everybody knows who he is by midseason. He makes the Future Stars game. He's in the big leagues by the end of the season, and he's part of their 2023 plans. So Shen was certainly onto something there, but they're going to have to open some space for him, and it could just be Harold Ramirez. But I wonder if they don't try to do something different with Paredes or Yandy Diaz as well to open up space there. But it's not necessarily because of the dollar amount, but as guys are starting to make money, it also means they're inching toward free agency, which means you're starting to run out of time to max out your trade value for them. But the Rays, as they are every year, Casey, I think the Rays are always in a very interesting position with like a half a dozen players. Doesn't it seem that way?
Yeah, and I think maybe not salary related because it's only $9 million, but they always pay attention to their stars as their salary sort of rises, right? So you could throw Rosarena into that mix. There's a lot of interesting names there on that list that are just starting to poke into that. It's the Rays. They might think about trading that guy range.
Right. So you look at the Red Sox up next. Nick Pivetta, I think they house that. Alex Verdugo at $9 million. Pivetta, by the way, is just under $7 million projection. Verdugo just over $9 million. I think they house that. Those are the only significant names on their list. I think they could end up trading Verdugo, but I think Pivetta showed them enough last year, and they're pitching starved at this point. That Pivetta is probably part of the plan. Not a whole lot going on in Cincinnati either. Jonathan India is an interesting name. First year of arbitration, $3.7 million projection, just because they have so many infielders, and it looks like trading India might be in their best interest. So we'll keep an eye on that from that standpoint. Not a whole lot going on with the Rockies when it comes to arbitration numbers. The Royals as well. Brady Singer at $5 million. I think they ride that out another year. The Tigers, really not a whole lot going on there either. Injury could, have something to do with how they approach the Casey Mize situation. And same thing with Spencer Turnbull and even Austin Meadows. I don't know that there's anything really significant there from a non-tender standpoint. I think the Twins, Casey, as we finish this out with the last 4 or 5 clubs, Kyle Farmer at $6.6 million is an absolute non-tender, right?
Yeah, but they're not giving him $6.6 million.
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah. Especially since it sounds like the Twins are trying to pare payroll a little bit. Like they were really aggressive in 23. They're trying to cut it just a little, not to the Padres level, but just a little bit. So I imagine Kyle Farmer is the one non-tender there. The White Sox, maybe Michael Kopech. You talked about him before we went live. I think that's probably it for the potential non-tenders there. And, he's obviously had injuries that have kind of upset his career. And the Yankees have a bunch of guys, maybe the most in the league, maybe right there with the Rays, eligible. The biggest number is the $15+ million to Gleyber Torres, but nobody thinks they're going to non-tender Torres. Maybe they trade Torres if they come up with a different solution there and they really like the trade return for him. But otherwise, that's probably going to stay there. I also wonder, even in New York, they're not going to non-tender Clay Holmes, but $6 million for Clay Holmes, again, brings up kind of the Jordan Romano conversation there. Can they do better? But they're going to do better before they trade Clay Holmes because he's been pretty good for them, and they obviously have bigger payrolls. So there you go. I think there's probably a small handful of those guys that we just talked about that have to get non-tendered. Otherwise, I think there's going to be some really interesting trades come out of all of this. And we'll find out in the next several weeks, obviously. But the November 17 deadline to tender, so we're going to know in a week. So right as we talk next week, we're going to know the answer to a lot of this stuff, and we'll certainly discuss that as we move forward. Before we go, Casey and I admire the Arizona Diamondbacks for their postseason run. The Arizona Diamondbacks won 84 games in 2023, and then they rolled into the World Series, which is pretty remarkable, right? I thought it was. When you look at where they came from, not this season, but in years past, like just a couple of years ago, this Arizona Diamondbacks club, before the Corbin Carrolls and the Alec Thomases kind of arrived on the scene, you go back to 2021. This the 2023 National League champions in 2021 were terrible, right? You look back and they were 52 and 110 2 years ago. Now, it's not as remarkable as going 52 and 10 and then going 98 and 64 or whatever, but 52 and 10 to improve by 32 wins and then have postseason success is still a pretty remarkable thing. And so it just made us think, are there some clubs? And again, we'll go to 2022 just so we can go compare year to year, because I'm using the Diamondbacks as the example and kind of the inspiration for this conversation. In 2022, after winning 52 games, they did improve to 74 wins, but then they jumped another 10 games and got into contention, right? So what are the teams, one in each league? Casey picked a National League club. I picked an American League club. And how do they get back to the postseason? Now, Casey, you've been writing about this at futurestarseries.com. Division by division. They're all out, right?
Yep, they're all out.
Yep, they're all out. Division by division, the teams that didn't make the playoffs, how do those teams go about getting back? Sometimes it's about they're going to get an injured player back that's key to them, and they're going to have this guy from the system, and they probably should go out in free agency, or they really need to focus on the bullpen, things like that. It's interesting in going through those, Casey, how different certain team situations are. And a lot of that seems to be about two things. One, the health of their core, their bigger names. And two, how much money we think that team is probably going to be willing to spend based on history and payrolls they've been carrying. So the team you picked to discuss here today is the St. Louis Cardinals. They had a very strange 2023 season. They were bad. I have the record actually right here so we can speak in fact. 71 and 91. And it was I believe it was the fourth worst. Wait, 1, 2, 3. It was the third worst pitching staff in the National League in terms of just pure runs allowed. So if you want to throw the defense in there too, fine. The pitching staff obviously needs help, but I don't know that offense is really set for glory either. So when you think about the Cardinals kind of being that team that may be one of the most likely to go from 71 wins to legitimate contention next year, what are the kind of the core things that you're thinking they need to do and they need to make happen this winter?
Yeah, I mean, I think you go over some of those pitching numbers again, or some other ones, but they were ranked, number 29 in KBB percentage in the majors as a rotation staff. Yeah, that's not
and a lot of that
good,
was just not striking guys out, right? A lot of that was on the strikeout side.
Yeah, and I mean the walk rate wasn't great either, but yeah, they weren't striking anybody out. I think they were like 17% strikeout rate, if I remember correctly. Mm-hmm. So the thing here though is their fix, which is more arms, and they've committed to, GM John Mozeliak. he said, we know we need at least 2 arms, despite the fact that he said 3 earlier in the year, which I think is closer to 3.
And
But,
now he's
he
back
said
to
he said now he's saying 2. So, but he said at least 2. So, if you can do something where, we can talk about the offense in a second, but if you can do something like go and sign Jordan Montgomery back because you just traded him, and then go and get Sonny Gray or Blake Snell or Eduardo Rodriguez. And so there's 2 there. And then you're probably going to trade, Dylan Carlson or Lars Nootbaar or somebody from that glut of outfielders that they have and go and get another starter from that deal. There's your 3 starters and you're sort of in it again. I think that they really overestimated what the pitching staff was going to be able to do this year, outside of Jordan Montgomery. And I think he was even a surprise in how well he pitched.
Yeah, especially after the trade. You go to a
Yeah.
place like Texas and even pitch well at home in a new environment. He was very, very good.
The offense disappointed too. I mean, it seemed like they had a chance to be a top 10 offense in baseball.
Arenado, Goldschmidt just to start, Nootbaar, Gorman, like their names there. Yeah.
Yeah, there's names there, right? And so then they end up with just a team 104 WRC plus for the year, which is number 13 in baseball.
Which is pretty ordinary. It's not bad.
Just average.
It's just
That's
ordinary.
average offense, right? So,
and in terms of runs scored, though, too, I think they were 19th in the league in runs scored. So their performance offensively suggests they should have scored more runs. So there might be an issue there that they attack that's very particular and very specific, whether it's they're not getting enough runners on base or not enough extra base hits, or maybe there's some issues with runners on base. Maybe they're striking out too much, things of that nature that they'd have to attack as well. Payroll-wise, they seem to be in pretty good shape. But I do wonder, and this is something we talked about quite a bit already, even though the offseason is less than 2 weeks old. There are some names on the potential trade market. We talked about Juan Soto. Pete Alonso in New York is getting buzz. I do wonder about Paul Goldschmidt. I do wonder even if the Cardinals go, and it seems like they are, let's just retool. Let's get this pitching staff going, and we have a chance to win this division. And who the hell would blame them for thinking they can win the division? The Brewers are gonna fade. It looks like they're gonna trade away. So it's really like the Cubs and the Cardinals from a veteran-laden team standpoint, and then a couple of young teams like the Pirates and the Reds that you're battling. It's probably the approach I would take too. But I think you can probably do that while trading Paul Goldschmidt and just giving first base to, for example, Jordan Walker or Nolan Gorman, or a combination of. And seeing what you can do there to save you a little payroll. Maybe you can buy that third starter instead of having to trade for him. I would at least explore that because it's the final year of Paul Goldschmidt's deal, and I believe he's 36 years old now, Casey.
Yeah, and if you can find a team that, wants Paul Goldschmidt and one of your outfielders and has a pitcher that you're interested in, and throwing that package together, that could be the way too. And you talk about the division, with the Cubs, we don't know that Bellinger's not going to be back. I don't think he's going to be back, but losing Bellinger, not that is going to directly affect how the Cardinals think, but the division getting weaker is, like you said.
Sure.
So there's just there's every reason for them not to go and get better, right? So yeah, it's really interesting. They do need to upgrade the bullpen a little bit. I think on my article on Future Stars series, I threw out a name like Hector Neris, somebody that can come in and
might be able to get him on a 2-year deal for $16 million too.
On a cheaper deal that can come in later in the game and get you out of situations. But first things first, they've got to fix the rotation, and they need guys to improve. They need Nolan Gorman to be better. They need Jordan Walker to play a full season and be better. Lars Nootbaar probably needs to be better. So
yeah, he really struggling against lefties. Is he an everyday guy? And if he's not, do they have another answer there? Do they have a platoon partner for him, or whatever that situation might be? What's interesting is the Cardinals too. Like a lot of times, like I'm not a big Pythag guy when it comes to like win-loss expectation. I'm just not before the season, not during the season, not after the season. But sometimes you'll go to a team like the Braves. They won 104 games. The Pythag on them was 101. The Orioles won 101 games. The Pythag on them was only 94. You look at like the Brewers, 92 and 90. The Astros, 90 and 93. Like they should have won by that formula. They should have won 3 more games. The Twins should have won 93 games instead of 87. But you go down to and the Mariners, the Pythag on them was 91 and they won 88. If they win the Pythag number, they're in the playoffs, right? They win the division. Like it's amazing how different most of these are to some extent. The Padres, their Pythag was 92 wins. They won 82. But then you go down to those Cardinals, 71 and 91 on the season, and their Pythag says they should have been a 71 and 91 club. And if I'm John Mozeliak, I am thinking, I hate this. I can't even look at that and go, we should have been better, because the roster's just not good enough to be significantly better than that. They do have a kid in the minors that might be able to help them in the rotation at some point in Tink Hence, who's an electric right-hander I got a chance to see at the Future Stars game, but probably not someone you pencil in to start the season. So, you need at least 2 starters, and I think you're right, Casey. Maybe that third guy that's a strong back-end type, maybe a Sean Manaea or somebody like that on the free agent market that who upped his velocity this past year and that you really believe fits your ballpark and the way you like to pitch, would make a lot of sense as a third guy for the Cardinals. I can see it. I can see the Cardinals winning the division next year. That division is terrible. It's Cubs and Cardinals unless the Pirates and the Reds do something significant in player acquisition this winter. So I certainly agree with the direction it appears the Cardinals are going. So in the American League, I chose the Red Sox. Now, I was just talking about the Pythag. The Red Sox last season were 78 and 84. Their Pythag says they just should have been 500. Obviously, big time roster issues there. Most of that is on the pitching side. That Red Sox offense, though, even considering it is a fairly hitter-friendly ballpark, I think we can all agree that's not a pitcher's haven by any stretch of the imagination. But that pitching staff, though, whether Chris Sale is healthy all year or not, first of all, you're not going to be able to bank on that. You're not going to be able to plan on that. You're not going to be able to bank on that. But that ballpark behind Coors Field over the last 3 years is the best hitters ballpark in baseball. And that offense, that lineup, was 11th in the majors in runs scored, Casey. That is a significant problem for the Boston Red Sox. And you know what? It really sucks about this. Yes, they lost Xander Bogaerts. Trevor Story's been inconsistent, hasn't been in the lineup a ton. Alex Verdugo's been pretty good. But the biggest issue last year, as they finished 6th in the American League alone in runs scored, and were slightly below average in WRC+. But you look at that, you take a step closer to that and get a closer look at that. Rafael Devers was good, but he wasn't great. And that's a problem. Xander Bogaerts is no longer there. Devers was the guy that was paid big time. Just turned 27 years old. Age is not the thing here. But the last 2 years, he went for 38 homers and 27 homers and hit 33 this year. That's not the issue. He had 280 and 295. He had 271 this year. That's not really the issue. He slugged over 500 again. That's not really the issue. What is the issue? Well, the issue is while the league was getting better because of the rule changes, there was more offense. Rafael Devers basically stayed the same from a performance standpoint. So he's not the difference maker at the end of the day that he was the last couple of years, and he needs to get back to that. That's the number one key for the Boston Red Sox. But as much as they're going to go out and look at fixing this pitching situation, because when you look at, you talked about the Cardinals struggling with their pitching staff and particularly their rotation. The Boston Red Sox were just as bad, if not worse. The ERA was 4.5, and when you break that down into rotation versus bullpen, this is a rotation 12th in the American League with an ERA of almost 4.70, and all the other runs metrics back that up. They did not do a good job of keeping runners off base, and then once they got on, keeping them from scoring. One of the 4 lowest left on base percentages in baseball for their starting staff alone. And then when you go to the bullpen, they had some guys that did some things, but they didn't do a good job preventing runs from scoring. Again, they were 9th in the American League in left on base percentage. If you want to win a division, if you want to win a World Series, you're going to have to do one of 2 things with your pitching staff. Not allow a lot of base runners for your bullpen to clean up, or be really good at stranding them. So the Texas Rangers scored a bunch of runs, so they built themselves a cushion. They were one of the worst teams in left on base percentage in the bullpen, and they still got to and then ended up winning the World Series. Although those are full season numbers, and they were helped by Jordan Montgomery in their rotation for the last couple of months of the season. But that Boston Red Sox club, they don't really have a hat to hang on in the rotation, really, or in the bullpen.
And the rotation.
I don't know how they're going to do it, but their money has to go to both the pitching staff and the lineup. And you would think like an 80-20 split. They're going to have to be more aggressive than they've been in years, Casey.
Yeah, you take and taking what you said about the ballpark into factor and it being a good hitting ballpark, but they were 5th worst in allowing home runs in the majors. The 4 in front of them are Oakland, Washington, the Reds, and Colorado. Not teams necessarily known for having good pitching. 6th is the Yankees. So they're lucky in that way that they're in the division with another team that can't pitch either. But you can't be giving up 1.5 home runs per 9 innings and expect to win a lot of games. So
that's pretty crazy. And even on the road, their homer per 9 is 1.4, the worst in the league, other than Oakland and Kansas City. That's even on the road. That's not something that can continue. Now, it's not like they don't have some guys. Nick Pivetta, we talked about him. Chris Sale, if he's healthy, he's got a chance. Cutter Crawford had a good year, but they don't really have that guy. I mean, if Chris Sale didn't have the injury thing, we'd be talking about Chris Sale. Well, at least they got Chris Sale, and then they can kind of build the rotation behind there. If I'm a Red Sox fan, Casey, I'm really freaking disappointed if I don't go hard after Yamamoto and hard after Aaron Nola and hard after Jordan Montgomery and try to get 2 of these guys. I would be disappointed. It does sound, though, like Yamamoto is keen on the Northeast. It's keen on New York. It's keen on Boston. And if that stays true, it'd be interesting to see in that division, like, what are the Yankees? This is one of the most fun things to do, by the way. If the Yankees want Yamamoto, it's pretty clear, right? If the Red Sox get Yamamoto, what do the Yankees do? And if the Yankees get Yamamoto, then what in the world do the Red Sox do? Do they pour that $200+ million into 2 other starters? They get like Sonny Gray for $480 and also add Blake Snell or something like that. I just think while teams don't necessarily react that way to other teams, but the fact that in that scenario, the Red Sox would have lost out on their number 1 target. So what's their reaction to that? Fascinates me over the offseason. But I do see a ton of things in Boston I like. Rafael Devers is going to bounce back at least a little bit. It's going to be at least 10% better. Maybe 15, 20, 25% better. He's capable of that at the plate, entering his prime years, 27 years old. Alex Verdugo is a solid, consistent, above average to plus offensive contributor. He throws well. He's not a great outfielder, but he throws well. That's a guy you can put somewhere in your lineup, almost anywhere in your lineup. He's kind of a Michael Brantley, kind of the new age Michael Brantley. He's not really great at anything except putting the ball in play and hitting for average, and he tends to do that. Their first baseman, Tristan Casey, like, that's a guy that they can kind of say, he's our first baseman for the next several years. Let's not worry about first base. Now we can go out and say, can we find an everyday shortstop? Can we find it? Or if we want to throw Story back at shortstop, can we find an everyday second baseman? Can we find some outfield help? Well, here's why I picked the Boston Red Sox, Casey. If you are in the market, while there's not a lot of bats out there, if you're in the market for something offensively and you happen to have space in your outfield, this market does have that. Teoscar Hernandez. You could trade for Josh Bell, who opted in Miami. You could probably trade for Michael Conforto in San Francisco. Jorge Soler, DH/outfielder. There's lots of those types. Lourdes Gurriel, if you're looking for another basically Alex Verdugo type guy who not a plus guy, not going to hit 40 home runs, but is a good defender, solid contributor, consistent. He's not going to break the bank for you. You could try and make a deal for that kind of it. Outfielders are easier to acquire, and that's why I think the Boston Red Sox are in a pretty good position. Here's a prediction I'm going to make. We talked about Willy Adames in the Brewers. I think Willy Adames ends up in Boston. Play shortstop for them.
I like
it. Hopefully Trevor Story's healthy at second base for the Red Sox sake. If he's not, you have your backup plan, which you had to deploy this year a lot more than you really wanted to. But when you look at that club, there's already some interesting guys. You get Luis Urias is an interesting guy to have on your bench. He'll get on base a little bit, make some contact. Certainly draw walks. Justin Turner walked, so you don't necessarily have that spot, but he wasn't great anyway. But when you look at what they had at second base last year, there wasn't really a ton. Some guys that did some things. Emmanuel Valdez was actually pretty decent for them. I mentioned Urias. They probably need another answer there. So if you go Adames and play him at short, and you play Trevor Story at second base, you hope Trevor Story's healthy, and then you go out and say, who is the guy that's going to back up Trevor Story at second base in case he gets hurt? Because you know what, Casey? Trevor Story's going to get hurt. He was only healthy for 36 games last year. But Boston needs to get back. And this is maybe the biggest key. I don't think they need to spend $300 million. But Boston needs to get back to acting like the elite market they are. They did spend $222 million in luxury tax money last year. So it's not nothing, right? It's not. But when they were at their height, they were top 3 to 5 in the league. They were 5th in 22, 6th in 21, 8th in 20, 1st in 2019, 1st in 18, 6-5, 3-5, 3-2 since 2012. Tons of top 5s, top 6s, and a couple of number 1s and number 2s. They need to get back there. They were 12th in tax payroll last year. It's the Boston freaking Red Sox. Get aggressive, make some additions. And that's one of the reasons, Casey, I would not rule out Juan Soto of the Boston Red Sox. I know that we've heard the Yankees, we've heard the Mets, we've heard lots of things. We've heard the Rangers, we've heard the Astros for Juan Soto, we've heard the Cubs for Juan Soto. I would not rule out the Boston Red Sox. Would solve a lot of their issues. They give him a bat, mostly a DH, but he could probably learn to play right field at Fenway for a little bit as well. That's why I picked the Boston Red Sox to be the most likely team in the American League that didn't make the playoffs and didn't even contend for most of the year to get back. That AL East, tough, Casey, but it seems to be, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not all that stable. I know, we don't know what the Yankees are going to look like. That was an 82-win team this year. I don't know what that's going to look like. The Baltimore Orioles overachieved by 7 games, even according to Pafag. It's still probably at least a 90-win team, and they want to get better. So I think they're for real to some level. But is that a 100-win team for real? Not necessarily. The Tampa Bay Rays, maybe a little fragile. Maybe a little fragile with the Shane McClanahan stuff, with the Wander Franco stuff. Maybe they have to do some things for payroll. Maybe they have to trade Glass now. Maybe they have to move things around because of the position stuff we're talking about with all those guys at third base, first base, DH. I think Boston can get back. I do. I think they get back. The Toronto Blue Jays baffle me. They seem to make good moves, and they just don't seem to work out a lot of times. I'm not talking about the Varsho one either. You had Chris Bassett after adding Jose Barrios a couple of years before. And you just have the worst luck in Alek Manoah completely falling off planet Earth. If Alek Manoah was a number 3 last year, don't the Blue Jays win at least 5 more games? I mean, there's direct value, and then there's indirect value about having a top of the rotation starter. And he turned into a gigantic nothing burger for them. It's the most baffling thing I can remember in baseball in the last 20 years. So weird.
The Mariners, man. The Mariners ruined him. I'm telling you.
Yeah, and I know Mariners fans like to say that, but I think something burgers ruined him. I called him a nothing burger, but I think the fact that burgers exist is really part of that. Maybe he didn't take his conditioning, serious enough, but man, he just he turned into he was one of the best 5 starters in the American League in 2022. No matter which way you looked at it, like 5 was the worst the worst spot you could put him in. You couldn't justify anything lower than that. And you could even say he was the best. And now he's like not playable. Like if he was a prospect, Casey, he would have been 60 grade blue chip with a Cy Young upside. And now you're just writing the letters NP or CP next to his name. NP being non-prospect, and some of the old school scouts would write CP. Can't play, can't pitch. It's remarkable. But I think the AL East is a little more open and susceptible for a team like Boston to jump up, or a team like New York to jump up and get into the top 2 or so and be a legitimate contender and get into the postseason next year. So I'm going to choose the Red Sox because there is payroll available. They do spend. They even spent $225 last year. And I think there are signs that they're willing to spend this year. We've heard them connected to Ohtani. We've heard them connected to Yamamoto. So I don't think that happens unless ownership in the front office, the new front office, have been kind of told that, hey, we're going to be able to spend some money. So there you go. We'll see. After this podcast sits for about 6 months, Casey. So 6 months puts us where? It puts us to like April. So let's say 7 months. So at the end of May, Casey, here's your job now. At the end of May, if the Boston Red Sox are terrible, I need you to delete this episode. And
straight out of the archive.
And especially delete this episode if the Red Sox do a bunch of stuff and are still terrible, and the Cardinals did a bunch of stuff and were good, because I don't want this episode to live out there where you were dead on and I was dead wrong. I can't have it.
You know what? Maybe instead I'm going to repost it for a week straight
in
that event. Yeah. 7 days a week.
On that note, Casey, I have an update on your paycheck. Oh boy. All right. Good stuff. We'll talk in next week. I think Joe Doyle is going to be back. We'll get busy on some more clubs and free agency, and hopefully we have some trades and free agent signings to discuss. But until then, sit and be patient, I guess. Or you can deploy what I like to call Jason intelligence. It's JI, not AI. Find ways where you don't have to be patient. Just find a way around having to be patient, because patience blows. And yes, I'm a child when it comes to patience in a lot of ways, but it's all connected to baseball, I promise you.
You think Joe's coming back on the show? I don't know. I can't get you guys to link up now. It's either me and Joe or you.
3 weeks in a row,
Jason.
Right?
Yeah.
2 weeks in a row.
So 2 weeks in a row.
We talked last year. We talked last week. Right?
Yeah.
I was back.
Did we all talk
two out of the last 3 weeks, right? We were on last week, right? Yeah.
You guys can only deal with each other once a month.
What year is it? I can't remember anything. This has been a week where I felt like I was soaking in a river. Don't ask me what that means. It felt right.
I do a parting shot. I have a parting shot because we talked about Luis Arias a whole bunch today. Mm-hmm. It came out today at 7 o'clock or so.
Okay. 7 o'clock Eastern. While we're recording,
that Luis Arias is open to.
I like how you say Arias, by the way.
How is it supposed to be said?
It should be Arias. Don't get me wrong.
Arias, right?
Apparently, it's Arias, like A-R-I-S-E. Okay.
Arias.
So
I'm just gonna call him Luis. We'll just call him Luis. Yeah.
L.A.
Luis A.
So Arias. What was the news again?
He's open to an extension. He would like to be back in Miami.
How kind of him.
The Marlins have not talked to him, however, about an extension, and that is probably more the news here. So,
although it's early, it is early in the.
It is early,
but you would have thought if they were going to do that, they might have.
They probably reached out at this point. Yeah. So.
Interesting. If I am not mistaken, by the way, Luis Arias, and it shouldn't be Arias. Don't get me wrong. I'm with you. It should be Arias.
Arias.
Come on, man. Silent E in the A sounds like an I. Get out of here, man. I don't know what are you trying to do to me? Yeah.
And the Z is an S now. I mean, come on, what are we doing?
I know. I believe Luis Arise is represented by MVP. I think that's his agency. MVP is very proactive in getting the player where they want to be. Very player. Let's make the player happy. So if the player says, "I'd like to make a bunch of money, but I want to be here," that means he wants to make a bunch of money, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the most money possible. And if Arise wants to return to Miami, you got to think there's a chance that he gives up a couple of bucks to be able to stay there. And you can understand him wanting to stay there. The weather, the location, Miami Beach. Maybe he thinks he's going to run into LeBron. I don't know. Yeah, interesting. Good stuff. Is that really a parting shot, though? I don't think it's a parting
I guess
shot.
it's not, but I wanted to get that. I wanted to throw that in there. So
much appreciate that. My parting shot is I don't love Bryce Harper at first base. If they really think it's necessary because they don't want him throwing, or for some reason he can't throw, fine. But what are we talking about here? How old is Bryce Harper? 17? Like he's been around for 28 years, but he's still not that old. He's 31. I mean, they're going to make the decision that's best for the team and best for the players. It's fine. I don't love that that's where we're at already with Bryce Harper, who just turned 31 years old.
I think I'm just surprised that they are limiting it to full-time first baseman. Because to me, why wouldn't you, if you're going to play him primarily at first place, fine, but you can still throw him out in right field.
I suppose they can still do that. I guess
13 times a year or whatever.
Yeah, and I guess they could probably still do that or play him at DH or whatever, of course. But maybe that's just how they're going about their off season. Like, we don't need a first baseman. You know, we have a guy that can back up first base. We go to Baum, or we can go to a Schwarber, we can go to another guy if we want to play Harper out in right field 20 times. But maybe this is about, like, what do we do with the outfield? What do we do with, other positions on the field? But Harper's going to be the main first baseman, so we don't need to do that. And maybe that was about Rhys Hoskins.
Yeah, and they came out and told Rhys Hoskins. I think the news was that they're not bringing him back, right?
Yeah.
So
so Harper. So we're not bringing back Hoskins, and then the next conversation they have is Harper's going to be our first baseman. So it kind of links together. I just don't love it. I don't love it. Mike Trout is not a good center fielder anymore. Is still a pretty good left fielder, but Harper, man, I'm not going to bitch about it. He's still stealing 10, 15 bases a year, and it's still great. I'm a big Bryce Harper fan, and it's incredible though. And this will be my parting shot.
And that might be something he wants.
He might have wanted it. He might have
wanted it. Yeah.
Absolutely. I just don't love that that's where we are. Not that the Phillies are dumb or whatever, but just I hate that we're there.
Yeah.
This is a guy who was a catcher in high school, who I saw at the College of Southern Nevada, caught one day, played third base the next day, and played center field on day 3, and went 6 for 7 with 5 walks and 3 bombs at 17 years old. And now he's at first base at 31. I just don't like I don't like how that sounds. I just don't like it. My parting shot here is Joe Doyle. So Joe brings nothing to the table on this show. I just wanted to get that out there. Okay. Joe comes on this show with his pompous attitude and his know-nothing, his notebook full of nothing. He's got nothing, right? And we let him on our show, Casey. We let him join us on the show for his benefit. And then he has the nerve to get in his car and go on a road trip while we're recording. I just don't get it.
We're slaving away here. And
I know. This is hard work, man.
And Joe,
I said we weren't going to go an hour and a half, but here we are because it's hard work.
Yep.
And by the way,
right,
for those out there, I'm terrible at projecting how long a podcast is going to last. Casey knows this as well. I am terrible. I'm like, probably only going to be 40 minutes today, hour 22. Probably only going to be, an hour today, hour 40. I'm terrible at that. Absolutely. I'm the worst, right? Yeah, I'm the worst.
Yeah, I mean, I think
that's my parting shot is I'm the worst, but Joe Doyle is worse than I am.
I think my parting shot is going to be that next week, this is going to be a 45-minute podcast.
It probably will be because Joe will have like this hard out at like 3:45 or something weird.
He usually does.
Yeah, you know what we should start doing, by the way?
3:45.
We should start like, all right, Joe, if you have a hard out at 3:45, at 3:45, you just leave. Just leave, and Casey and I will continue. And we'll be like, all right, Joe, see you, man. And then we'll just keep talking. Like, that's what I think.
Yeah, I like that idea. We'll let him sign off, throw a parting shot, and then that way our parting shots can be talking crap about Joe because he's already gone.
Behind his back, my favorite type of parting shot, behind his back. And there's no way he can find out. You know why? He doesn't know how to play podcasts. He doesn't know how to do it.
You think Joe's going to listen to the show?
Him, so he doesn't know how to listen. Yeah.
We're really going to know if Joe listens to this show. If he doesn't listen to the show.
He asked me once, I promise this is true. He asked me once, hey, what channel on the radio is the podcast on? All right, we'll get back to baseball next week. For Casey Bellon, for Joe Doyle, who's not here, thank goodness he's not here. I'm Jason Churchill. This has been the FSS Plus Podcast.
So just chill till the next episode. Falling back on that ass, what a hellified gangster lean.